Okay, good morning. This is a meeting of the Program Subcommittee for the Critical Area Commission, Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays. This meeting is being held virtually using Microsoft Teams. A video of this meeting will be provided on our website in accordance with the Open Meeting Act requirements. Preliminarily, I would like to review the ground rules for this meeting. All microphones will be muted. We ask that you hold all questions or comments until the end of each presentation. Please announce yourself by name when speaking so that any attendees on the phone can identify you. If you are joining the meeting by phone, press *6 to unmute yourself. The public was invited to submit written comments on any agenda item up to 24 hours prior to the meeting. Those comments, if received, will be read by Commission staff at the appropriate time. Mr. Kelly, if you would be so kind as for the record to call the roll of those members in attendance.
Sure thing. So what I see is you have Commissioner Greer, Commissioner Gerthofer, Commissioner Hewitt, Commissioner Lewis, Commissioner Ferguson, Commissioner Merritt, Commissioner Cornwell, and Commissioner Mulkey in attendance. Is there anybody else I missed?
Hearing none. Thank you, Nick.
Sure.
I think that the first item is actually the program subcommittee minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to review those minutes? And if so, Commissioner Ferguson, do I hear a motion to approve those minutes? Commissioner, if you could unmute yourself.
You may be muted, Commissioner Ferguson.
I submit that the minutes stand approved as written.
Is there a second? Commissioner Hewitt.
Commissioner Mulkey.
Thank you, Commissioner Mulkey. We have a second by Commissioner Mulkey. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the minutes are approved unanimously. I just would like to note the first item on the agenda is Talbot County Country Clubs in the RCA text amendment. I believe that that has been withdrawn by Talbot County. Is that correct? So moving on to the second item on the agenda, Talbot County expansion of structures used for non-conforming uses. This is a text amendment, and I believe Ms. Esposito, you have the floor.
Thank you, Commissioner Greer. Good morning, all. I'm going to get into presentation mode, and when I do, I will not be able to see you, so you're going to have to speak up. Let me know when you're able to see my presentation.
Yep.
I can see it, yep.
Okay, great. So good morning. Again, I'm Jennifer Esposito, and I'll be presenting the text amendment on behalf of Talbot County relating to non-conforming uses. And before I begin, I want to recognize Brennan Tarleton with Talbot County. He's the planning director, and he'll be joining us today to help answer any questions you may have. Talbot County Bill 1525 amends section of the county code relating to non-conforming uses. The overall intent of the text amendment is to allow for a greater increase in expansion of non-conforming uses within structures than the current language allows. So within your staff report and on the slide, the standard text is the current text, and the new bolded or the bolded text is what is being proposed. And I'll go through that in detail throughout the presentation. So the overall aim of this language is to provide a greater flexibility for expansion of non-conforming uses housed within smaller structures. So if you had, let's say, 1,000 square foot building, under the current code, an applicant could come in and request up to 20% expansion of the non-conforming use within that building. And that would allow an expansion up to 200 square feet if the full maximum was requested and approved. Under the proposed language, an applicant could come in with the same 1,000 square foot building And under the new text, they can request 3,000 square feet of expansion. However, it cannot exceed 100% of the gross floor area. So under the proposed, the same building would get up to 200 square feet of expansion of the non-conforming use if it was requested the full amount and it was granted. And before I kind of get into the bill, I wanted to provide a little bit of distinction between non-conforming uses within structures and non-conforming structures. With today's amendment, we're strictly dealing with the non-conforming uses located within structures. The county code has separate provisions relating to non-conforming structures. To provide a little bit of clarity on the distinction between the two and how it's structured within the county code, an example of a non-conforming use can be an existing legally grandfathered commercial, institutional, or industrial use within the resource conservation area, such as a restaurant located in the RCA that was constructed and operated before the enaction of the local critical area program. An example of a non-conforming structure can be a dwelling that was constructed in the critical area within the critical area buffer, again, before the enaction of the local critical area program. And while I'm providing this as an example of either non-conforming uses or structures within the critical area, I want to point out and note that this language, the non-conforming use provision, applies countywide and it's not critical area specific. The Talbot County Code provides that lawfully established non-conforming uses may continue, but the number and extent of non-conforming uses may be limited by prohibitions or restrictions on enlargement. And currently there is a process for a request to expand non-conforming uses that must go before the Talbot County Board of Appeals as a special exception. All special exceptions are routed to commission staff for review and comment if they're located in the critical area. And under the bill, the text amendment under Bill 1525, that process remains the same. The request would still be routed to commission staff as a special exception, which would be heard by the Talbot County Board of Appeals. And if it's located in the critical area, all critical area development standards, such as lot coverage and tree clearing limits, still apply. And so while the provisions of the non-conforming use of the county and this text amendment applies countywide, commission staff is looking at the proposed text amendment under the lens of expanding non-conforming uses within the resource conservation area, or RCA. There are several existing non-conforming uses within the county's resource conservation district, or RCD, which is equivalent to the RCA. These uses consist of inns, schools, corporate retreats, restaurants, just to name a few. And I'd like to point out that Commissioner Taylor had a question before today's meeting. And I'm pointing this out in the presentation as he's unable to make it today to today's meeting. His question pertained to the level of impact this bill will have on the RCA within the county and asked if there was additional information provided that assessed the overall impacts. I can say that in my many years of working with Talbot County, I've only provided 3 comments on special exceptions for expansions of non-conforming uses within the RCA. One was for an engineering school, one was for a restaurant, and one was for an environmental education research facility. The county did provide commission staff a general list of non-conforming uses within the RCA so that we could have a better understanding of the level of impacts this language would have in the RCA if the existing non-conforming uses were to expand. And once we looked at the information the county provided, commission staff felt the need to recommend an amendment to the text that more narrowly tailored the allowance for non-conforming use expansion in the RCA. And I will discuss this change in more detail later in the presentation. And while critical area law allows for some flexibility for expanding grandfathered non-conforming uses in the RCA, critical area regulations places restrictions on allowable uses within the RCA as a way to help maintain the overall land use characteristics of the RCA. So essentially, there's a fine line of providing some flexibility for allowance of expansion for existing legally non-conforming uses in the RCA, And then when such expansions are considered inconsistent with the purposes, policies, and goals of the critical area regulation, and that no longer maintain the overall land use characteristics of the RCA. A question and potential concern then arises when Bill 1525 is applied to grandfather nonconforming uses in the Talbot County's RC district, as it appears that the applicant may request multiple expansions for the same nonconforming use so that the cumulative expansion of the use in the RCA could exceed the 20% or 3,000 square feet over time. So let's take, for instance, a couple of the existing nonconforming uses. This is an existing restaurant within the resource conservation area. If they say the bill is approved and they come in to request an expansion to the maximum amount and they were granted that, and 2 to 3 years later, they realize, business is great. It's time to expand again. They go in for another request to the maximum amount and they were granted that request. There is no limit to which an applicant can request this expansion. And potentially another more realistic scenario, this picture up here shows a no longer existing, but the use still, I guess, remains on the property as a non-conforming corporate retreat. If a new property owner comes in and sees this property and the potential for a greater expansion idea for this corporate retreat that could be accommodated through multiple requests over time, you can, I think, clearly see the potential issue with the land use no longer being consistent with the RCA land use characteristics and goals. So at some point, this incremental expansion could become inconsistent, like I said, with the land use characteristics of the RCA, and such expansion would be more appropriately accommodated through the use of growth allocation. And growth allocation is our process that allows for more intense land use to either change the designation to a limited development area or intensely developed area. And under the growth allocation process, there are standards and factors that must apply before a growth allocation is approved. But I just wanted to point out that we do have a process for cases such as this, when a non-conforming use expands to a certain point. That is no longer consistent with the RCA. Currently, Talbot County Code does address the cumulative result of nonconforming structure expansion within the critical area by placing a limit to the cumulative result of multiple expansions. That language is provided in your staff report and shown bolded and underlined and in front of you. I'm noting this as an example to show that Talbot County contains existing provisions which place limits on the expansion of nonconforming structures in the critical area, in contrast to the proposed text amendment on nonconforming use expansion. Commission staff recognizes the need to allow for some flexibility for expanding of existing nonconforming uses in the RCA, particularly when the aim of this text amendment is to provide more flexibility for expanding nonconforming uses located in smaller structures. And this is really, sometimes you have to expand to make your company or your business more economically viable. However, to help alleviate the concern over the potential allowance for cumulative expansions over time, Commission staff proposed an amendment to the text to help more narrowly tailor the provision for expansion within the resource conservation area. And the proposed text is shown in front of you and bolded and in red. The proposed new text does mimic the county's limit of expansion of nonconforming structures and places a limit on the overall expansion of a site. If this language were inserted in the code, an applicant was granted an expansion of a nonconforming use in the RCA to the maximum limit set forth in the code, and subsequently wanted to add more after the initial expansion, they would need to seek growth allocation to expand. So with that, Commission staff recommends that the program subcommittee concur with the determination of a refinement and recommended to the chair that he approve the text amendment with the condition that it be amended consistent with the staff report. And with that, I will open up with questions, and I will leave it in presentation mode, but I won't be able to see you. So if someone could help me,
Sure, Jen, I'll keep an eye out if there's anybody raising their
thank
hand.
you.
Jen, thank you, and thank you for addressing Commissioner Taylor's email. I had a note about that as well. Before I do have a question, but before I ask that question, if any of the commission members have questions, if you could raise your hand and we'll go in order. Are there any questions by any of the commissioners? Okay, I don't see any. The question
Commissioner Ferguson just raised his hand.
Commissioner Ferguson, I apologize. I didn't see that. Commissioner Ferguson.
I had a number of questions that I raised with Jennifer yesterday. And since they withdrew the other aspect of this morning's conversation, it kind of obviates some of my questions. But I'd like to hear what kind of conversation, if any, occurred between the Talbot County Commissioners and the commission staff in implementing both of the projects or both of the text amendments that came before us.
Commissioner Ferguson, you read my mind. Jennifer?
Thank you for that. I can speak more directly to the bill that was withdrawn today by the request of Talbot County. And I don't want to muddle the details of that because it was withdrawn, but they did reach out to commission staff. We provided the commission's policy of golf courses, and we noted that the proposal was inconsistent. And we did extensive meetings with Talbot County prior to that for one particular property and provided the process to move forward under growth allocation for that particular property. For this particular bill, prior to it going to the local level, I will have to ask Charlotte what kind of coordination occurred prior to it being approved locally, because I'm helping out with Talbot County currently as Alex is out on parental leave.
Sure. So they sent us I guess, sort of a draft proposal for that language related to the country club text amendment. And we provided a comment letter that included the golf course policy with it, and sort of an overview of RCA uses in general and what is necessary for, maintaining the characteristics of the RCA. It was kind of more informational than a direct comment on the text amendment because it wasn't a formal submittal to us at that time. But we did provide back specific information related to the golf course policy and meeting that.
But for this particular bill, do you remember any coordination?
Oh,
I think
for the
non-conforming uses.
non-conforming uses. I do not. We were reviewing a text amendment related to inns. I know that draft bill was submitted at the same time as the golf course country club bill, but I don't believe this one was.
And Kate, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Greer. I just also wanted to point out for the benefit of the commissioners, we'll provide, it's up to the counties and the jurisdictions to reach out to staff to request feedback on text amendments and proposals, which, as Charlotte indicated, we provided. We tend to not say, yes or no, because that would be speaking on your behalf and commissioners. And so what we try and do is provide as much information as we can about whether proposals, appear in our eyes to be consistent or not. And then it's up to the county commissioners to take in that information and, make changes or not make changes. But also, I just wanted to point out that the planning director, Brennan Tarleton, is here in case Commissioner Greer wants to recognize him. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, because that was actually my question is, I see that the concern that staff has in trying to ensure that this is written appropriately to apply to the critical area. But my question for Mr. Tarleton and Talbot County is, have they reviewed the proposed amendment, and does the county have a position with respect to the proposed amendment?
Yes, hi, Brennan Tarleton and Bryce Shelton with Talbot County. We were able to work with Jennifer once she had drafted a staff report for this proposed text amendment relating specifically to the RCA, or the RC district rather, for the cumulative result of multiple expansions, which is the language you see before you in red that she had just presented. Based on the language that she's proposed, we thought that it would be adequate and acceptable to us as well to include that inserted language as part of this amendment. As she noted in her staff report to you, we consider similar language under our non-conforming structures section of our code, where it speaks to cumulative expansions of structures within the RC district specifically as well. And this would be one of those things that would actually just make it more consistent with how that section reads with respect to the non-conforming section entirely within our code. So we would be amendable to the proposed amendment offered by critical area staff.
Great, thank you. And we look forward to working with you.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you as well.
Are there any other questions by any of the other commissioners? Commissioner Ferguson, have your questions been satisfied? Just want to make sure.
Yes. In fact, as I said, the withdrawal of the other aspect of this morning's conversation obviates a number of my other questions.
And Nick, I guess the next question is, were there any public comments received?
We have received no public comments that I'm aware of.
So with that, Commissioner Merritt, is there a motion that the commission concur with the chairman's determination that the amendment to Talbot County Bill number 1525, which amends section 190-48.3 of the Talbot County Code, be processed as a refinement to Talbot County's critical area program? Further, that the proposed changes are consistent with the purposes and policies of the critical area law and regulation, and as such recommend the chairman approve Talbot County Bill number 1525 with the amendments set forth in the staff report. Do I hear a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Okay.
Jim Lewis.
Jim Lewis? Okay. Is there a second?
Jim Lewis, second.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner Merritt, second by Commissioner Lewis. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Moving on to our second item on the agenda, final regulations to amend growth allocation provisions and shore erosion control provisions. And Lisa, I believe you're on deck.
Commissioner Greer, one quick question. I just want to make sure we have it clear. The motion for that, was that Commissioner Merritt or Commissioner Ferguson who made the motion on that one?
I think we did it at the same time, so I
Yes,
wasn't sure on if I was moving or seconding. Seconding.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. All right. We'll go with Commissioner Merritt. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, are we ready? Can you see my presentation?
We can.
Very good.
Your volume is a little bit low. I don't know if that's just me or.
No, same here.
A little low.
Don't know how to adjust that. Any suggestions, Bob?
It's a little better now.
That's
Okay, I can try and talk louder. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Good morning. I'm here to present to the project subcommittee this morning the growth allocation and shore erosion control regulations for a final vote. You may recall at your September 7th meeting, these regulations were brought to this body for consideration. And subsequent to that time, they have been published in the Maryland Register. And so we're moving forward with the end of the process. So I'm going to quickly summarize those regulations since it's been a few months, and we'll go from there. So the purpose of these regulations, like many of the chapters we've been going through the past several years, is to modernize, update, and delete outdated provisions. With the shore erosion control regs, we are changing terminology. So the first thing we're doing in Title 27, Subtitle 01, Chapter 1, Regulation 1, the definitions, is we're updating a definition for agricultural best management practice, which has nothing to do with shore erosion control regulations, but it's something we noticed, so we're adding that as part of this update. And then we're inserting the new terminology. Instead of shore erosion control, it is called shoreline stabilization measures, which is consistent with MDE's regulations. And then going into Chapter 4, which is currently called Shore Erosion Protection Works, you can see I have brackets around those words because we are proposing the terminology now shoreline stabilization measures, again, to be consistent with the Maryland Department of the Environment's regulations. And then going into each regulation within that chapter, you can see the definition section of that chapter. We're repealing the old terminology. We're putting in an applicability section just for clarity for the users. And we're simply redrafting the policy section or regulation and the criteria regulation within Chapter 4 for updating purposes. Moving on to Chapter 9, habitat protection areas. Pretty much every time we go into one of these regulations that you see listed on the left-hand side of your screen, whether it's buffer, mitigation and planting, or buffer management plans, we're updating the terminology. And then under buffer management plans, we're also fixing or inserting, if you will, some more specificity to the regulation, but not requiring anything above what's already required. We're just saying that local approval of the shoreline stabilization measure or is authorized by the Board of Public Works or the Department of the Environment. So that's a clarification. And again, we're finding places in other chapters of Title 27 where we need to update the terminology, which we found in Chapter 14, Renewable Energy Regs. So that's what you're seeing on your screen now. And finally, moving into Subtitle 02, we're doing the same thing that we did in Subtitle 01, which is we're going into those definitions and, again, updating the terminology. When we get to Chapter 5, which is state agency actions resulting in development on state-owned lands, we're going into Regulation 5, which is now will be called the Shoreline Stabilization Measures regulation. And we're making the same changes. We're inserting an applicability section. We're repealing and reenacting certain policies and criteria sections. And then in the planting plan requirements regulation, we're doing that terminology change. Going back to Subtitle 01, Chapter 2, which is the development chapter, we're going into the growth allocation regulations, and we're doing some clarification. And the first one is under the submittal requirements, we are making a reference to the buffer to make it more generalized. So we're removing the words 100 foot. So it's clear that when we say buffer, we mean any buffer, whether it's the 100-foot buffer, the expanded buffer for hydric soils or highly erodible soils, to make sure that all those types of buffers are delineated on a plan. And then we're taking care of the terminology again, which came up in the submittal requirements. And then in the requirements for new intensely developed areas and limited development areas, we're making a clarification that I'm getting feedback, sorry. We're making a clarification so that towns can also utilize half of their growth allocation allotment when they're converting from a resource conservation area to another critical area designation. So a quick summary of the timing. As I mentioned earlier, the full commission voted at its September 7th meeting to allow staff to move forward and have these regulations published in the Maryland Register, which occurred on December 2nd. The 30-day comment period ended on January 3rd. We did not receive any comments during the official comment period. However, I was contacted by one of the river keepers and was asked some questions that had to do with the development chapter and the growth allocation provision. And I clarified that for them. And I believe they were satisfied with that response. I haven't received any further comments or questions. So moving forward today, provided the subcommittee, this is acceptable to the subcommittee, we'll move forward in the afternoon to ask the full commission to allow us to publish this proposal as final. And I estimate that if that happens, the estimated date of publication in the Maryland Register will be February 24th, which would have an effective date for the regulations March 6th. So the staff recommendation, as I alluded to, is to authorize us to publish these regulations as they appeared in the December 27th, 2022 edition of the Maryland Register as final regulations in a future edition of the Maryland Register. So I will turn it back over to Sue at this point.
Are there any, thank you very much. Are there any questions from the other commission members? And Commissioner Hewitt, I see that you have your hand up.
Yes, Lisa, tell me, the people who call themselves river keepers. I was on the Patuxent River Commission for a while, and there's are these people self-appointed? Do they have governor appointments or federal appointments? Who are river keepers and what's their role?
It's my understanding they're not appointed. They're not part of government. It's I don't know for sure, but I think it's a nonprofit organization. There's an umbrella organization that started up in New York State, and then it spread throughout other states, including Maryland. So we have river keepers pretty much on all the rivers throughout Maryland. So no, they're not appointed by the governor.
I mean, are they considered experts, or is their input above anybody else's, or are they regular citizens?
I think their input is just as important as anyone else because they're out there on the river seeing the issues every day. And they're very helpful to us at many times, contacting us and giving us information that we might not be aware of. And they also are out there in the communities, so they get questions and they can help us educate the communities as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions from the commission members? Okay. And I just want to clarify for our role this morning, this is coming back before the full commission for a vote this afternoon.
Correct.
So our motion this morning would be to recommend to the full commission that staff be authorized to publish these regulations as they appeared in the December 22nd, 2022 edition of the Maryland Register as final regulations in a future edition of the Maryland Register. Do I hear a motion to that effect? Commissioner Ferguson, since we missed you on the first one, do I hear a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Commissioner Hewitt, do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? No opposed. Any abstentions? No abstentions. The motion passes. And I believe that concludes our business until we reconvene with the full commission at 1. So Commissioner Hare Cornwell, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And Commissioner Merritt, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
See everyone at 1.